Hello, I am Sarah Ketchum with the Newport News Police Department's Public Information Office. This is the Arrested Minds podcast, where we're having conversations about mental health. Domestic violence can cause significant mental and emotional trauma for the people who are affected by it. The abuse is carried out by a cycle of manipulation and control that often stops victims from realizing they're being abused at all. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and joining me today to speak about this topic is Neisha, NNPD's Domestic Violence Outreach Liaison. Neisha, you're a survivor of domestic abuse, and I understand while you were in that relationship, you struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts. Can you tell us a little about what your life was like?
Yes. So I was in a domestic violence relationship for about 5 years. When I first met this man, I was introduced to him by way of his sister, who was a coworker of mine at the time. And I had gotten out of a relationship previously, maybe about 5-6 months prior to being introduced to my coworker's brother. So I wasn't really at a place where I was ready for another relationship, but kind of getting into that place where it's like, okay, it's time to move on. So when I met him, we instantly clicked. Everything was, great conversation. He had a great sense of humor. He was just, when you're looking from the outside looking in and you're looking at someone that you're interested in, it's like, wow, this person is perfect. This person is great, And at some point into the beginning of our relationship, he wasn't just too keen on, he had some insecurities as it related to my ex. And in order to move forward in that relationship or move forward with us as far as what we were going to do, he told me that I had to decide whether I would continue talking to my ex or talking to him. So the problem with that is this ex he was referring to, I have a child with him. So this source of insecurity became a reason for now, and knowing what I know now, just control and manipulation. So if it was anything that I needed to do as far as it related to communicating with my child's father, then it was, okay, accusations. Are you really just talking to him about, your child, or are you talking about something else? Are you really just going to pick your daughter up, or are you doing something else? So in the beginning of that relationship, and I can't even really say relationship in the beginning because we were just casually dating at that point. It was maybe 2-3 months in, but I found myself always trying to reassure him that he was the person that I wanted to be with. He was the person that I liked. He was the person that I saw myself with. And that was just very early in the relationship. And then looking back, I see that as red flags. But back then, I didn't see it as such. I just saw it as someone needing to be reassured that somebody cared about them. So what would later happen is that the isolation and the control. So it was little things like if I didn't answer the phone fast enough, if I didn't answer it in 2 rings, let's say it rang 5 times, then it was accusations that I must have been on the phone with someone else, or I must have been sitting or standing next to someone that I shouldn't have been with, and I had to run and go get to somewhere else to answer the phone where he wouldn't be suspicious. And again, I found myself just explaining, no, I couldn't get to the phone because I was cooking dinner. No, I couldn't get to the phone because I was helping the kids with their homework, things like that. So the things that I love to do as far as hanging out with friends or going to local open mics to hear some poetry and some music, those became a source of, it became an issue to where it was, hey, you're going out with your friends, but I wanted to spend time with you. Why do you have to go see them today? I barely get to see you because you're always working, because you're always going to this open mic because you're doing this. What about me? What about my time? So then I started slowly getting rid of the things that, I once enjoyed doing. So I stopped hanging out with my friends, and I stopped going to these open mics or to the movies with my girlfriends or anything like that, because again, I was trying to prove to him that he is who I wanted to be with. The relationship eventually progressed from just a control, manipulation, isolation to outright like mental abuse, gaslighting. And at the time I didn't know what gaslighting was. So it would just be little things. If I got upset with something that he said to me, if it was something disrespectful or degrading, he would tell me that he didn't say it and that I imagined it, that I must have had a stressful day at work and that I was just overthinking or being dramatic or being sensitive, or that he was just joking. So when he started telling me what to wear or what not to wear, if he would say things like, oh, it doesn't take a genius, or you're not the brightest bulb in a pack, or just something along those lines. And it was just disrespectful enough to make you question, like, okay, is this how I want to be spoken to? But not outright and not so blatant where you're like, okay, this is wrong, this is abuse. And that's the thing with abuse. A lot of times, I didn't think so. You don't think it's abuse when it's no fists involved, when it's no bruises involved. So that controlling, isolation, manipulation, gaslighting, I just thought that sometimes he wasn't the nicest boyfriend, but I didn't think I was in an abusive relationship. So when he first put his hands on me, it was such a shock. And again, this is from a woman who didn't recognize she was in an abusive relationship already. So if you would have asked me back then, that would have been the first instance of abuse, when it really wasn't. It had been abusive at that point for about 2 years. So that was my mindset. So again, he hadn't put his hands on me prior to me moving in. And I'm not thinking this is dangerous, this is a toxic situation or anything. I just thought, okay, sometimes we argue, but what couple doesn't? So when I moved in, that's when the physical abuse started. And the first time he did it, he was accusing me of something. And I had just gotten in from work. I had worked late. He was saying that I wasn't where I said I was, and he hit me with a pillow. And when I look back at it, it wasn't so much that the pillow hurt, it was just the act itself, the disrespect itself. But he hit me hard enough with this pillow that I fell off the bed. And I remember jumping up, and he came at me like I was just a grown man who stole something from him. And he was trying to get it back. Like, he just lost it. And I remember being thrown into walls. I remember being hit, kicked. It was just such a rage that I had never seen from him. And I remember being strangled in between this space, between the bed and the wall. I remember everything I had on. I remember the look on his face. It seemed like his eyes changed color. And I remember thinking that I was going to die in that space and that nobody would know where I was. And when he realized what was happening, I think he stopped because he saw my mouth bleeding. He let go. And I jumped up, I grabbed my purse and my keys, and I ran out. And I was crying, and then he came out running after me, and he was crying, and he was saying sorry, and he was just stressed, and he don't know what happened and what made him do that, and if only I hadn't made him so mad, and he just loves me so much, he's afraid to lose me, and just asked me to come back in the house. And I went back in the house because I had nowhere else to go. So instances like that happen more and more. I've been in the hospital with broken ribs. I've had concussions, black eyes. I got really good at doing makeup, and I got really good at telling everyone that I was okay.
Did anyone know what you were going through?
No, and that's the thing. I'm very close with my family. Majority of my family live in New Jersey, in New York, live up north where I'm from, and my father's here. So it was easy to pretend that everything was okay when majority of my family was out of state. And then my father, who's here, it was just easy to say, I'm doing all right, or just to kind of ignore some of the calls. And then because I had already started distancing myself from my friends and my hobbies and my passions and social media and things like that, I kind of just disappeared. So eventually friends stopped asking, do you want to come out? Or you want to go do this? Do you want to hang out Friday night? Because the answer was always going to be no. So nobody knew what was going on at all. And honestly, I can't even say I knew what was going on, because I had never pictured myself as a victim. I never thought that I would be in a domestic violence situation, because you just have this mindset when you hear people talk about domestic violence and you're not well educated on it, and you're kind of just presumptive, thinking that a victim looks a certain way, that a victim acts a certain way and does things a certain way. So I'd always thought victims just sat in a corner and cowered and didn't fight back. And I still, even after that first incident, didn't think it was domestic violence because I fought back. So again, it was just that everybody fights, everybody goes through this. So I was in this relationship. There's so many instances. There's not enough time on this podcast, but I will say what made me leave eventually was not the broken bones, not the concussion, not the degrading names, some of the most horrific names that still stick with me to this day at times. It was when we got into an argument and he was accusing me of something, it was baseless. There was no truth to it, but he thought it was true. And in that argument, he called my mother and my sisters the N-word. And so this was an interracial relationship. And for me, that it was one thing for me to not stand up for myself, but it was another thing for me to not stand up for the women I loved most, and they weren't there to defend themselves. So ultimately, that's what gave me the courage to begin the process of leaving for good.
So how did all this affect your mental health?
Wow. It's very difficult to go through something as traumatic as abuse, because it's not like you go on your first date and then this person hits you and then that's your red flag. You're like, oh, this person's abusive. That's not how it works. So usually you're invested in this relationship. You learn to love them if it gets that far. You care about them, and it's such a gradual process and so subtle that by the time you realize you're in an abusive relationship, you've been in an abusive relationship. And I once heard this analogy that just when I explain it to people, it's like if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog will immediately know this water is boiling, know it's harmful, it hurts, and it will jump out of that pot. But if you put a frog in a pot of lukewarm water and you just gradually turn it up just a degree, like every day, the frog will sit in that water because it's used to the environment that it's in. And then by the time it figures out it's killing them, it's usually too late. So it's the same thing, mentally I was just so broken, because if you have somebody telling you every day that you're worthless, that nobody wants you, that you're nothing as a mother, that you're nothing as a daughter, as a sister, if you have someone telling you that you'll never amount to anything, and then they just break you down with their words every single day, it gets to a point where you start to believe it. But then when they replace that with words of affirmation and affection and encouragement, it's confusing. So then you find yourself always fighting for that affection and that love, and it's like those crumbs that they drop for you every now and then, and you're just fighting to pick those up just for them to take them away, and then the cycle just starts over and over. So I was a woman who hated looking in a mirror. I thought that I deserved what was happening to me. I thought that it must be me. It must be my fault, because he told me I had never done this to another woman. So I'm thinking it must be something wrong with me. He told me he's never this way with anybody else. I saw how he was in public. His own family member who introduced us to each other, she had never seen this side of him. So I convinced myself that, or allowed him to convince me that it was me. So I was just broken and going through depression and suicidal thoughts and anxiety and everything.
What was the depression like?
The depression was suffocating, and it was heavy, and it was dark. I liken it to just being in a room, locked in a room, and it's pitch black, and everything that you need to turn the light on is within your reach. You just don't know it's there. So there's a flashlight with dead batteries, but maybe there's new batteries in a drawer next to you. There's a candle, but maybe the matches are across the room. There's a window, but you can't see the latch to open it. It just feels like you're in this dark place, and that the light is just beyond your reach, and no matter what you do, you will never get to it. And it's suffocating. It's to take the smallest thing, like getting up to brush your teeth, felt like having to get ready to make a Thanksgiving dinner or something. It was just very heavy all the time.
And you said you did consider suicide?
Yes. Yep. I did. I thought that, it would be better. I Googled different ways to die, painless ways, because I was just like, I can't go through any more pain. So it's like, how do I stop this pain without going through more pain to end this pain? I wrote letters to my mother, my sisters, my children. And going through that, and then learning from people who have had the same thought processes and struggled through it, people think that suicide is selfish. And I understand why family members who are left to pick up those pieces, but I also understand those who are hurting so much, all they want is the pain to stop. So, like a good friend once told me, who was struggling with her own depression, she said, family members, friends think it's selfish for those who are dealing with suicidal thoughts and ideations to consider taking their life, or for those who unfortunately do so. Whereas when you're going through that, she said, I think it's selfish for anyone to want their family member to be in so much pain. And when she said that, it was just really like an eye-opener. It's just, you just want the pain to stop. And at that time in my life, I just wanted the pain to stop. And when you feel like you don't deserve to be here, then why would you be here? At least that's how your mind works when you're in that place. So there were so many nights where I prayed to God, don't wake me up. Just let me go peacefully. My children would be taken care of. There's instructions. And then when I would wake up, I would be so mad at God, and it would just be like the most disrespectful wake up, because it would be sunny outside. The birds would be chirping, and my kids would just be like, Mom, what are we doing? What's going on? What are you eating for breakfast? What are we doing today? And it was just hard, and this was even after, it was during that relationship, just heavily in that, and then working my way to move out of that house and get into my own place, still struggling with intense feelings of depression, suicidal thoughts, lack of self-worth, all these things. So it's just really hard to pick those pieces back up and put them back together.
And so even after you left, how have you dealt with those feelings?
So I've learned telling my story has helped in healing, because when you keep something like that so painful and bottled in, it eats at you even when you don't think it is. Doing this advocacy work, because when I first started sharing my story, it was just because I was angry and I was bitter and I was broken, and I was just at a place where I didn't even trust myself. So when I first started telling my story, it was to help me. And then I found that it was helping other people and that there were so many people going through it. So I started sharing it more and more. And then I learned that talking about it and helping other people was helping me. And it made me feel like my pain had a purpose. It made me feel like I didn't go through that just to go through it, that there was a purpose behind it, and that I can take that and use that to help other people overcome as well.
What would you say to someone right now who might be struggling with domestic abuse?
I would tell you that you deserve better, and that you can have better, and that it seems scary, and that the unknown is scary, but there is happiness on the other side. There is peace on the other side. There is light on the other side. And the first step is just knowing that you don't have to go through what you're going through, that baby steps do matter, and it just takes reaching out to someone you trust, whether that's a family member, a friend, your local domestic violence agency, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Just talk to someone and take that first step just to say, I need help. I'm being abused and I don't know what to do. And then just go from there. And know that, there will be days when you're not sure if you made the right decision, but in the long run, you realize that you did.